So, hi everyone. I'm back here with Bev Jo Von Dohre, who is a lesbian separatist who has lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for a while now, for decades now, but she's lived all over the country and the world as well.
Well,
And
briefly, but yeah. I'm
yeah,
from
briefly.
Cincinnati.
Yes, she's originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, but
Yeah.
she's now living here in Oakland, California.
And I've been in the Bay Area since 1965.
Very long time.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited to have her here again because we really want to talk about lesbian culture.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. For a lot of people, lesbian culture didn't really become a phenomenon until the 90s. But in fact, lesbian culture has a much older point of origin, and Bev knows all about that. So
Aw,
let's talk about that.
you're
So
very kind.
yeah, so Bev, I don't know if there's a particular year or a particular time in your life where you really thought that you were first exposed to what you would call lesbian culture.
Yeah. Well, things are often in my life are often like at the, I don't know what you call it, the mark. I was born in 1950. 1970 is when I really found the lesbian community that was beyond the bars. And I was too young to go to the bars or join Daughters of Belitas, which was the one organization I knew of. But then suddenly there were lesbian. So I guess I want to say I'm seeing a lot of things online that are not true at all by women who are much younger. Some are lesbians, even some are not, sort of saying who we are, what our community was. And it's like the misrepresentation and the erasure of our history and our lives is very disturbing. So I guess I want to say if anybody wants to contact me to go into more detail beyond what we're doing here, I'm very available. And I also have our book, which is from, again, on the 1990s, so it's always yeah, which I wish it was republished and could be distributed because it used to be in the libraries, and of course now it's not. And if you go in the bookstores, you see just tons of stuff about trans, including men saying they're lesbian feminists who are. So I guess I wanted to say one of the first things. So in 1970, I found the lesbian community that was, as I knew it, was starting. And lesbians were calling it gay women's liberation because they'd been in the gay liberation movement. But by the time I found it, late 60s, early 70s, it was really a lesbian movement. And everything was pretty much women only. Everything pretty much I went to. I mean, there were no books yet. There were no newspapers. They were just starting. So there would be events. And I think I talked about this already in the previous video, that there were lesbian group houses back when you could, for $50, you could live in a group house in a room, and they had large spaces, so there would be parties and dances and meetings, and so it was all kind of just this whole entire community. And then there began to be coffee houses and bookstores. So it was a very, very exciting time. There was so much. And this was from 1970 and increasing through the 70s was an amazing time. And in 1972, I was part of a group that did, I think, maybe the first lesbian feminist gathering in the world, or at least that we knew of, and that was in Berkeley. And it was a small group, but anybody pretty much could join the collective. So, and it was very strange because it was not acceptable to say you were a lesbian separatist, but it was assumed everything was women only at least. And this was a lesbian only gathering. And it was wonderful. And it was very egalitarian. It was free. It was just a space somebody got that was in Berkeley in a schoolyard with nice trees like here. And it's interesting, a year later there was a huge conference that was the West Coast Lesbian, I'm trying to think what was it really called, Lesbian Conference, not Lesbian Feminist, that Jean Cordova did in LA. And it was the opposite of what we did. It was very kind of corporate, trying to get attention, money, status. And I don't know how she got the space, but she was privileged. And so I think they got access to UCLA. So there's a big auditorium, there are all these rooms. And of course, she invited as the keynote speaker a bisexual, even though this was supposed to be a lesbian conference, and that was Robin Morgan, who actually was very good because Gene had invited a man to sing his so-called lesbian songs, the same man who's been stalking me since I was 17. And pretty much what I remember, everybody there protested and stopped him. And I don't think Jean had heard him, but I thought she thought this would get her notoriety and popularity and increase her status. Years later, at a conference in Oakland, I asked her why. And I don't know. I mean, to me, she was a pathological liar. I didn't really know her, and she said, I just thought all the trans women were black prostitutes, which is not what Elliot was, and that's certainly not the ones who've invaded our community. I mean, yeah, there are some men who do that, but I don't even think they would be called trans women, even by those that support men saying they're women. So that was very weird, but the conference was still really good in spite of Jane and the few who supported men.
Do you mind if I just ask a question
Oh,
here?
please do.
Yeah,
because
so
that's kind of it. I think
yeah.
I think we covered the rest for the most part.
Okay,
but maybe
yeah.
not.
So I just want to ask, first of all, how did people find out about the conference? Like, or for either of these events that you mentioned, how did people find out about it? Was it like an invitation only?
No,
Advertising?
It was public. For our conference, our gathering, and that was interesting because some of the ones organizing were socialist feminists, which are not like socialists now. They weren't lefties, really. They were really lesbian feminists, but they were into egalitarianism and very class privileged, so those tend to go together with socialists. There was a local newspaper called the Berkeley Barb, and then there was an offshoot of that. And I forget which one, but the advertisement for our gathering was in that.
Okay.
So it was very cheap local newspaper. My lover at the time, Bobby Brawley, did a drawing for it. But for the West Coast, I think there were starting to be publications that were women's or lesbian or feminist, and I think that was advertised widely. So probably in everything imaginable, and maybe other public media too. Because Jean wanted to have this whole movement, which was very LA in terms of being very corporate, where she'd have all this power, I think. But so there were lesbians who came from all over to that.
Okay.
That was more well known, I guess.
What about like security? Did you need security for these events, or was it actually pretty safe?
I don't think we even thought of it.
Okay.
But it would have been nice to not have the man there. But yeah, that should have been considered, at least for the big one. The little one, I don't know. It was so nice. That's where I met my first separatist and fell in love with her. But that's
cool.
another issue. I know. Of course, she's gone back to men, as so many have. But which is why I say it's always a choice. But it was a wonderful event, and just all these lesbians got to connect. It was mostly local, but it was somewhat advertised. But the West Coast, when it was very advertised, and they invited particular individuals, like groups, like the Family of Woman Band, which was a lesbian feminist band, musical band, very political, with Linda Shear, and they were invited to perform, and they were incredible. And there were others, poets and writers, and of course Robin Morgan was there.
Yeah, I'd actually like to hear more about the cultural aspect, the music and the poetry and the writing. I'm assuming there probably wasn't much in the way of film, lesbian TV
I don't
or
think
film,
there was
probably,
much. But there was other stuff all the time. Like in terms of this area, there was, in terms of poetry, there was Pat Parker, Willis Kim. There were a lot of poets. And singers-songwriters. And then there was the Berkeley Women's Music Collective, who did very political songs and nice songs. And, of course, Olivia Records changed things. So that's a whole other issue. But, yeah, culturally, things got better and better. And then pretty soon there were newspapers and there were books, and that changed things, too. But way back in the early 70s, there was a lot of wariness and suspicion about anybody who'd gotten into academia, which I think makes sense because of the bad stuff that's happened from that. So these women they've gotten degrees, and they don't really know about the lesbian community, but they kind of think they're our bosses and they can rewrite the history. Of course, there were some who got into that position who did good things, like Janice Raymond and Mary Daly and
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn Fry. So,
That's interesting that people were already seeing warning signs in
oh yeah,
academia about
right away.
what was going on. Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of oblivious about a lot of the stuff, and just unaware of a lot of things politically.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know I was working class because in school they told us we're all middle class. Well, no, there's major differences. But that even happens now. A friend will say, "Well, we're all middle class." I'm like, "No, we're not."
Mm.
But everybody knows they can read it, so you get treated differently. Even if people are saying, "I didn't know," it's like, well, you can see it and you're acting on it. So that's like Lauren Levy, who's in such a power position with WDI. That came up yesterday in the lesbian separatist group online.
Oh.
Almost everybody was arguing against her, but I couldn't see it because she's me blocked.
Isn't she in the group?
She's in the group, but I couldn't see what she said.
Okay.
But she's like one of the ringleaders of WDI.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so ever since I made it public that she on the phone had said to me, "You say working class, but you sound intelligent." I mean, it took a while before she took that to then block me, but they were talking to her, so they kept saying Lauren Levy and tagging her in the thread, but I didn't know what she said. So I was like, "What is she saying?" So I went public with what I know, which is the last well, it wasn't contact. She and Sheila Jeffries did a video trashing me and Linda Strega by name and our book.
Right, yeah.
With a really grotesque image of a sadomasochist gay man, equating us with that because we talk about what it means to be butch and femme, which is not about role-playing, but it's against role-playing. And it's trying to support girls who think if they're not ultra-feminine, they must be male and should start getting surgery and drugs.
Yeah.
So there was a big argument with her, and I'd love to know what she said because everybody was disagreeing with her. So that was fascinating.
Okay, I actually missed that. I'll go back and
you'll
check
be able to see it.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. But
I was impressed with stuff they were saying. One of them said she sounded like a TRA, which I think trans right activist.
Yes, yeah.
So what did she say? I mean, I don't know.
But anyway, going back to the topic of lesbian culture,
Right.
I'm just curious specifically when it comes to music.
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned before how there was this distrust of people who were too immersed in academia.
Yeah.
I'm curious with music, was there a sort of distrust of people who were too mainstream, or did people want to be more in the mainstream?
Some definitely did, but some were worried at that point. Then they changed. You know, like it's interesting seeing photos now because, like, you could see photos then where some of the lesbians hadn't come out yet, like Susan Griffin. But her sister ran one of the local lesbian bars and was out as a lesbian. And then Susan took her time, you know, and she was one of the writers who became a big deal mainstream writer. And now her avatar, she's wearing lipstick. So a lot of them went back to that kind of thing. I don't know what she's writing now, but she was somebody else in our community. I mean, there were a lot who took a while to come out, who I don't know what that was about, I guess, because so much lesbian hatred. But like I always say, it's all choice. So later, since then, lesbians say they don't know hardly anybody, who's gone back after having been a lesbian. But I sure do. And to me, that's, as times get more difficult, they go back. And as times are much more supportive and the community seems more exciting, they come out. So it's definitely saw that. I mean, droves of women came out in the 70s, early 70s and on, and then into the 80s.
Would you say then, when would you say then that peak plateaued and started declining and people got out?
At some point in the 80s, and I'm not sure exactly when, but there were things that happened. I mean, there was a lot of support to be a lesbian and look like a lesbian. And then there was a lot of backlash, like, because women wanted their head privilege and they wanted their feminine privilege. By feminine, I don't mean intrinsically femaleness, but male-identified femininity. So there became these reclaiming femininity articles that were in lesbian publications in the early 80s. And that kind of connected with the sadomasochism that was brought into our community by Pat Cliffia and Gail Rubin. And of course, Pat now says she's a man. But,
Right, yeah.
and, I mean, to me, she was always very visibly femme. But, you know, she's a whole other story. We can do a book on her. But she still has tremendous power in the lesbian community, I think, and outside of it. Like that horrible movie I saw last night. That's a brand new movie. And they showcase her book, Macho Sluts, which glorifies a lesbian being gang raped. So, but she's local. So she did a lot to change things. So, and that was interesting, too, because the group they started was called Samoa, and they had like a booklet, and they used feminist style language, and they used, you know, like instead of saying woman, they said woman with 2 O's, and they were really trying to lure in the lesbian feminists and downplay the disgusting parts of sadomasochism. So they did entice some that way. That was interesting. And then by the time they did Coming to Power, they became sort of more what I would say hardcore, openly sadomasochist. And a lot of them came from the gay male culture. Like they really emulated and worshipped gay men. And there was a conference here that was more recent. I'm trying to think, Linda would remember. This was 90s already. That was supposedly to connect trans men with butches, when butches really have nothing to do with trans men. And trans men aren't real. They're women who want to be men or get male privilege. And there was this huge conference. But I don't see any record of that anywhere. Most don't know about it. But I went, and Linda went, to try and argue with them, which we did, and got treated very badly. But there's so much kind of invasion of our community. But in terms of music, there were different kinds of music as well. Like some were really into what they would have considered hard rock. And some were saying that's male. And others were saying, no, it can be just as lesbian feminist as other styles. And then, you know, of course, there were always the folk singers. And then there were the jazz style performers, some of whom are still performing in our community, like Gene Feinberg and Ellen Sealing. And, I mean, there were so many different, wow, it was just amazing, musicians and writers. And I mean, there was a lot in this area alone.
I actually didn't know that about the hard rock lesbian scene back then.
I know. I was in a group house with a lesbian that was really into that kind of music more. I don't know. It's interesting. And there's some very creative music with melodies and lyrics and all. Some of the Berkeley Women's Music Collective music I think was really nice. People might not have think they were so skilled, but I thought they were fantastic. And some of them are still around.
And is this material, it's not necessarily available, like, is it on the market, or is it just...
Well, Olivia produced 2 of their albums.
Okay.
And then there was B.B. Croach, who were fantastic. There were a lot, yeah. You have to look at all their music. But what's annoying to me now is when lesbians talk about so-called women's music, they bring up who I think are the really more boring, meaningless, you know, like they would just... I mean, to me, it's kind of like La 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 with the lyrics meaning nothing, and I'm thinking about Chris Williamson. And Meg Christian was a bit better, but she got really freaked out. She got into some religious cult and was all self-hating about being a lesbian. But a lot of what Olivia was bringing in and producing was more acceptable, meaning closety kind of lesbian performers.
Do you remember Alex Dobkin?
Oh, yeah. Alex made a huge difference, and she was around before Olivia. And in a lot of ways, they're trying to erase her because she was singing Any Woman Can Be a Lesbian. And she came from I guess a het folk kind of scene. But, yeah, when she came out, I mean, she'd already been married and had a daughter, but she came out and became this very strong lesbian separatist. So it was very hard to ignore that lesbian separatist existed when she was performing, and every other word in her song was a lesbian. So it was really excellent. Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember if there was much in the way of a lesbian music scene prior to the sort of feminist or lesbian separatist
I
phenomenon?
think there was, yeah. Well, there was a lesbian who did an album on folkways, Kathy Fire.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not sure her background, but the FBI, what I heard from an ex-lover of hers was the FBI captured her, held her prisoner, and raped her. And
Wow.
and she had studio time that was like an hour or something, so she could do like only one take of the songs on her album. But
Oh
it's on the
man.
Folkways label. So it
Okay.
used to be you could get it in the library.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if she's done other music, but there were others like her that were less well known. And then
Uh-huh.
there was Sidonie Avedi's, who was calling herself Sally Piano. I think her real name was Sally Avedikian, Armenian background. And when I met her, she was 19 and she was performing um, at lesbian spaces, singing and playing piano. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, she was as good as Laura Nero. Like,
Okay.
it's similar kind of voice and style, although she didn't like being compared and said she never heard Laura Nero. And she did incredible songs that were very separatist and basically, in a lot of them, confronting het women about seeing het women looking miserable and why are they with these men. And but she went back to men. Now, I don't know
Mm.
how long, how many years it took, but she did a couple of albums that are still available and you can still hear online, but they weren't her strongest. They were more like she's trying to get a career at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but those are available too, and that was separate from Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
And but she was in this community too. I'm trying to think who else there was. There was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably some I don't even know about.
And also, once again, going back to the whole question of how this music was advertised. It was just
Usually
public.
women's here. In terms of public, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think, when did I see Sidonie? It was probably at one of the lesbian coffee houses. Of course, those were not closed to the public, but they would be full of lesbians and nobody else. And also women. I mean, things were always geared towards women. The word
Mm.
lesbian wasn't usually used.
Okay.
In other places it was, like Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Uh-huh.
They had lesbian-only space.
Okay.
And I mean, people don't know, but like, when I say people, I mean lesbians. um, the Midwest was a lot stronger politically than here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably the East Coast, too.
Interesting.
Yeah. And here, a lot don't know that. You know, like the Family of Woman band and Linda Shear were from Chicago. And there was, I think the best lesbian newspaper was from Minneapolis. That was done by separatists. There were various lesbian journals. I was from Iowa City and other places. So
Is it just that you think maybe the scene here was more dominated by men, like gay men, or
no,
it's just
we had a completely separate community.
okay?
I never went to anything where there were gay men that I could think of.
Mm-hmm.
Completely separate. And so that when it became this LGBTQ whatever, it was like, what is this? We were never. I mean, they would say, okay, there's going to be a march that's for lesbian and gay men that was protesting something, or the Pride, so-called Pride Parade,
Mm-hmm.
and they would bill it as lesbian and gay. But I remember going with a group of lesbians where we would have our own signs, and we just marched separately. So, but the men have their own neighborhoods. Like here, they've got Castro District in San Francisco, and I've had it for decades. Even with so many who died, they still have their own neighborhood because they have so much money.
Mm-hmm.
They've got Provincetown. I don't know where other parts of the country what they have, but I think they got a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And we never ever had our own community anywhere. So, trying to think, things were not. That's what was strange to me when the men who hated us and looked down on us and said in writing we were dirty, they didn't want us to come to their events. Suddenly, they were dying of AIDS and asking for our blood because it was the cleanest. I think I've talked about this
Mm-hmm.
before, and I don't want to bore anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like all these lesbians went to support and help them.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't get it. And I met a gay man hanging out with friends at El Rio who said he had AIDS and men are always coming up to him asking him to give them AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
And he said gay men would never have helped lesbians if lesbians were dying like gay men were dying, and lesbians swarmed to help them. And they took over the Shanti Project, which had been made for dying lesbians and gay men, and suddenly it was just from gay men. So most lesbians don't even know about that.
So you think it was the AIDS epidemic that put the L and the G together, more or less?
It might have been, but I don't know what I don't even know why the B got put in there. I mean, clearly it's a choice. I mean, to me, there's no excuse for women to be bisexual if they could be lesbians. You know, unless you just think everything's equal, nothing matters. But to me, bisexuals really harm lesbians emotionally, and as we know, more often physically with the STDs they're spreading. And they're STDs that used to be incredibly rare that are now horrifically common, like throat cancer, and that's sexually transmitted from men. So that's pretty bad. I mean, and they would always push pap smears, and they wouldn't tell girls and women, if you're not getting fucked, and it's awful for girls and women who've been raped, who are exposed to the HPV virus, human papilloma virus, that publicity should be out there instead of telling women who've had no sexual contact with males they don't need to get these invasive, painful, humiliating tests. They never said what the cause was. They knew damn well what the cause was.
Well, I'm just curious too with the AIDS epidemic. Did that impact the mood of the lesbian cultural scene? Or
not anybody I really knew.
Okay.
But to some extent, some of them who are already, I think, looking for an excuse to hang out with men more. But the lesbian community I knew was quite separate.
Okay.
I mean, even though the men had money and spaces, we weren't around them. We had no reason to be around them. And I met 2 gay men when I was friends with some of the lesbians from El Rio, including some of the musicians, and this was later in the 90s. And they wanted to be with lesbians because they felt treated so badly by other gay men because they were a monogamous couple.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they said the other gay men were just mean to them.
Okay.
And they were an interracial gay male, older gay male couple, one of whom, and maybe both, already did have AIDS. So... But the HPV thing, it's very scary. I mean, I know a lesbian who's never been heterosexual who got an STD from HPV from a lover who had been with a bisexual. So it wasn't even directly from the bisexual, but it was through another lesbian. So that's how transmittable it can be, depending. I'm thinking mucous membrane contact. But, I mean, I had never thought that lesbians have to be scared to be with women who've been heterosexual. Because unfortunately in our community almost everybody was. They brought other things like really male attitudes and a lot of lesbian hatred. And that we tried to talk about that in our book, and almost nobody else has ever. Like, it's like, what's gone wrong? Well, we try to cover all of it in our book. And it could be talked about more, but I'm not seeing it being talked about that in a way that could fix things. But yeah, in terms of the culture, I'm trying to think what else. Whatever questions I'll try and answer.
I'm just curious. I mean, one big issue with organizing any sort of lesbian event, or even just in general, like women's events, is this whole question of how to advertise and how to vet and how public to make it.
Yeah. Especially now.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be an issue. We did a separatist gathering in 1983 in San Francisco that was one day, a room rented in the women's building. Would have thought the women's building would have meant something, but one of our collective members worked as a security guard for the women's building and said men would hire out the rooms for strip shows.
Okay.
It was never a women's building. But we did a gathering that went for a whole day, and we were later told a man called it a bomb threat. And nobody told us.
Oh my goodness!
I know.
So was that security at the women's building that knew about the bomb threat, or who was it that?
I'm not sure. That came later. I'm not sure. It might have been that she found out later. But at that point, we didn't have to worry about men coming pretending they were lesbians.
Right.
That was not really happening, other than Elliot. I mean, I think there was like kind of one in each of the counties. Like there's one in Marin who goes to the dances, and
Mm-hmm.
he's all, it's like the lesbians worship these men and they're disgusting. I mean, even one of the friends that one invites him to things. There was like a dance, a lesbian dance, at a regular mainstream bar because we didn't have our own spaces, and this drunken het man came in, and he grabbed 3 different lesbians there, kind of around the hips, and kind of did this to them, and when he did it, after he did that, the man who is accepted as a lesbian in this community, maybe this was in Marin, he did it to the friend who welcomes him to things, and she shoved him back.
Mm-hmm.
So he's watching the openly het man, and he's the het man who's pretending to be a lesbian, and he does a similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, they try to pretend they're not like the other het men, but they're worse,
Mm-hmm.
as we know, because they don't let us have our own spaces. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what point they began to be accepted, because they weren't for many years.
Okay.
And now they've taken over the Dyke March. They've taken over a lot of the remaining publications.
Actually, that would be a good segue to talk about the Dyke March.
Sure.
Because, I don't know, for those watching, as of 2024, when we're conducting this interview, this year's Dyke March was actually in San Francisco, was actually technically canceled. I mean, there were still a lot of people who showed up, but the formal organization fell apart, and there's a lot of question as to why that was. And there was according to some of the reports, they brought up a whole bunch of things, and one of them actually was controversy about the trans issue. So I'm just curious, when was the first Dyke March that you went to?
I'm not sure. I would have gone to the first one. We had been marching kind of as a separate contingent with the so-called Lesbian and Gay March. And then we had a Dyke March, and there was one in Oakland as well.
Okay.
Every year. And there were thousands of lesbians.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then each time there began, like, everybody would meet at Dolores Park ahead of time. And, but it still was, like, once it started, more and more joined.
Mm.
But it began to be more and more het couples,
Mm.
half naked, in the park, perving on us. And I remember noticing on some of the blocks, because you'd walk and then you'd stop so others would catch up. And I would notice, like, on this particular block, it's all het couples or men.
Mm-hmm.
So that just kept happening. But then I think, was it 2018, whenever it was, some lesbians had signs about the surgery and drugs being given to kids, so-called transition kids. And they were attacked and knocked down, and their signs ripped up. And that was a major change. And so there were these, like, I remember seeing a massive group of what looked like lesbians yelling at us and saying, trans women are women, and all that crap. So before then, the year before, maybe it was that year, I called up whoever was organizing the Dyke March for the next time and said there was, can something be done? The place is full of het men.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever answered the phone was clearly a man. And so went into the whole thing about, they're trying to keep the cis men out. But clearly they were making it be for the men they call trans women.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, even worse than the ones who don't even pretend.
Mm-hmm.
So that became more and more what was happening.
Mm.
So I think this year there was a statement that was really bizarre. I'm sure you saw it. It got posted in the newsletter. Yeah, that was just like, it's all about, it's for dykes. It's a Dyke March. It's for dykes. And then it was all pro-trans.
Right, yeah.
And you're not supposed to question or speak
Okay.
against men being at the march, because they're not men. They're dykes.
Yeah.
And they have their own march.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's a whole separate trans event there. So.
But they don't care. They want what we have. That's why all these lesbians that don't know, it's like, why don't they just get with each other? Why don't they have separate sports for them? They don't want that. They want to take everything girls and women have.
Mm-hmm.
And lesbians especially.
Yeah.
That's what they want. They know exactly what they are. They don't really think they're in the wrong body. That's never been the game. That's what they say, so they get all the sympathy.
Yeah.
But they want access to lesbians, like het men do.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So going back in time again to when the Dyke March started, what would that have been, in the 70s or 80s or?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Gotta look that one up. Yeah.
And so you're saying
It wouldn't have been
went,
70s, I don't
okay, yeah. And when it started, so it sounds like it was a pretty big thing. I'm curious
Yeah.
about the San Francisco versus Oakland differences.
Oakland was smaller and it seemed a lot more lesbian and lesbian identified. It was a lot easier,
Okay.
yeah, to just be there and hang out.
Uh-huh.
So that was nice. That only ended because of the whole pseudo-pandemic, as I call it. The pandemic that wasn't. That shut down a lot of stuff, and that was sad. I mean, I wish it would happen again because there's so many lesbians in Oakland. And of course, the men were there, but not to the same extent. And that was interesting, too, because I know this lesbian who says she's a separatist, and she came out as a sadomasochist before she became a lesbian. And that's her main identity. So, of course, she supports the trannies who are sadomasochists. Like the one who stalked me and I'm actually in danger from. She still supports him. And she says he's half man and half woman. And it's like, that's the other myth I keep saying that's really important to counter, that I see in these groups on Facebook and sometimes elsewhere online, where they say the earlier trannies were not like now. They were nice and gentlemen. They just wanted to live their lives quietly and live as women together. That's a complete lie. The early ones are at least as bad, if not worse. And they're some of the ones who would patrol at Michigan with weapons, with the swords and spears and make threats. And one of them killed the lesbian couple and their son.
Right, in Oakland, the Dana
As
Rivers
we know,
thing, yeah.
he's in a women's prison. He was one of them. So when they keep saying that, and I keep trying to counter, because those women who are saying this weren't alive then, they weren't here then, they weren't anywhere in the lesbian community, they weren't alive then, and they're repeating these things about the original and they say they were transsexuals versus transgender. I don't know what they're talking about. None of it is real. I mean, I always want to why don't we talk about transracial, Rachel Dolezal? And now I know a few lesbians who did try to say she was sincere and she wasn't a racist. And if that's true, she wouldn't have sued Howard University for discriminating against her as a white woman. But she did. So she was just playing the same game, but the black community did not accept her ever. Only white women, make excuses for her. So...
yeah. So, okay.
It's very comparable anyway.
All right.
Yeah.
Would you say then, did you go to any Dyke marches other than Oakland or San Francisco?
I don't know that there were any others.
Okay.
Here. At a certain point, because of chemical sensitivity, I can't travel.
Oh, right.
Because I can't stay anywhere. I mean, if I could stay somewhere safe, I would really consider it. But I don't. I'm sure there were. Yeah. So... I mean, and I had gone to the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which was a big lesbian gathering. And there were others I went to. Once I was back in that part of the country, I went to the New England Women's Musical Retreat and just other events. And there were others here, too. But not like the Dyke March. It was theoretically more political, but it was also kind of a party. So
you were... How often did you go to the Michigan Women's Festival?
I went 3 times.
Okay.
And I had to fly. No, I didn't. I drove. I did drive each time. What am I saying? Which is like 3 to 4 days driving. And then where do you stay? And I was sick already. So it was hard. And then when I got there, it was hard. It's basically vegan food. And just everything about it was really, really difficult. Physically, and it was difficult in other ways, but there was like a separatist area, and it was just nice to make contact and see all these different lesbians and meet lesbians I had been in touch with. And then there were the separatist gatherings that happened, and that started from like about I'm trying to think, when was it? It did begin in the 80s, and then it went into the 90s, and that was in Wisconsin. And they were pretty big groups, like over 100 separatists. Lesbian separatist. And
And the separatist lesbian gatherings in Wisconsin was, maybe could you help explain what their framework for lesbian separatism was? How were they defining that?
I'm not sure. I mean, similar to how I would, which is, well, there are different ways, I guess, um, that we don't want to have men in our lives if we have a choice, or
Mhm.
it's very limited, based on, like, it doesn't mean you can't work. It doesn't mean you live in the country.
Okay.
It really doesn't ever. No. God, I hated that because it still said online, "Oh, I can't be a separatist because I can't really afford to own land and live in the country." Well, who does?
Yeah.
Only the most privileged, and they're not usually separatists. Because and they're still talking about getting lesbian land somewhere. I'm like, why? Be careful,
Mhm.
because if you put your money in and you don't do it right, you end up homeless. And some
Yeah.
pretty horrible things have happened in some of those lands
Mhm.
where they allow children, so where boys are allowed, so girls get raped, and the mothers of the boys and the boys are supported, and the girls have to leave with their mothers. I mean, that's
Mm.
one thing I heard with one of the Oregon women's lands. Um, so there's all that whole other issue. But no, that's not separatism. I think I'm repeating some of the stuff that was in the
Yeah,
previous.
yeah.
But I guess maybe it needs to be said again because I know the video hasn't gone out, but I just saw it again online and some of them are trying to make this land where they can actually live and arm themselves. Well, that could be good, I guess, but I
Mhm.
don't know. I mean, I think women need to know how to defend themselves, that's for sure.
Actually, I, okay, I think maybe you've also mentioned this in the
Yeah.
previous interview about the was it jiu-jitsu
Mm.
was a common sort of social hobby that lesbians
A lot of the
did.
lesbians got into martial arts that now would get into going to gyms for
Okay.
looks. And it was a mixture of self defense and martial arts.
Okay.
And there were different kinds of martial arts because there was karate and kung fu and
Mhm.
jiu-jitsu and judo and there were a few women's schools. So I
Mhm.
went to what was called the dojo in Oakland. That was a women's school. That was
Okay.
really, really good in terms of. And then that process of as you're learning, you're taught right away to teach under supervision. So then you can teach self-defense.
Okay.
And then I did that for 10 years separate from the dojo,
Mhm.
but still was at the dojo for at least 5 years.
I'm just curious if you had any experience with the sort of women's spirituality
Then there was
groups.
that.
Okay.
There were those events, yeah, and there still are, I think, in some ways. And I went to some of the stuff, but it wasn't as airy-fairy as it is now, where you see
Okay.
the images online, and these are mostly het women running feminist groups, but it's ultra feminine with, you know, long-haired, skinny white women in gossamer gowns running barefoot through the woods. Like, I mean, the kind of women's spirituality or lesbian that I saw back in the 70s was much more grounded and, like, I don't know, much more connected with nature.
Mhm.
What they're doing now is the kind of thing that I always think, what is the effect on little girls who think this is how they have to be a woman or they
Mm.
must be a boy?
Mhm.
Because I mean, that's been so harmful. And these women are so into it, they just won't give it up.
Mhm.
They want to be like that. They want to look like that. It's like, why? Well, a lot because they have men and husbands and boyfriends, but for others, it's still like that too. I know lesbians who are doing that also.
So this older women's spirituality scene that you're familiar with, do you remember what sort of practices or what was done, or was that not really your
Well, there
lane?
was the Budapest. Susanna did, who's wrote a book or books, who did rituals, and
Mhm.
she wasn't so airy fairy, um, and I remember she did. Oh, she just would do different kind of events that were supposed to be spiritual. And there was a publication called Woman's Spirit that came from probably Marin or Sonoma County that was around for a while. Um, I don't know. I kind of dabbled. I mean, we wrote some of the stuff in Dykes and Gorgons was like did sort of images of the ancient goddess
Mhm.
statues and all that. But I don't believe in God and I don't believe in a goddess. But um, but I think if there is a life force or entity that is across species, that is connects trees, plants, animals, the earth, the air, water, and but I really back away from anything that's considered spiritual now because it became so bizarrely religious, and women were bringing their own religious backgrounds into it. So they're trying to Christianize stuff and do other things like that. That was disturbing. And some of the ones who've done some of the strangest things in the community, like Pat Califfi is an ex-Mormon, and Sonia Johnson was a Mormon. And I always think of the newer the patriarchal religion, the worse it is. I think Islam is way worse than what came before. Because when you go further back, it's cultures rather than religion. But with the really ancient ones. But any religion's not good. But Mormonism, it seems to churn out some really strange individuals who've done some really destructive things in the lesbian community and elsewhere, who are power mongering. Like Sonia Johnson, I think, really wanted to be in the tradition of the Mormon prophet. So she set herself up to get all this worship, and then became this big icon where she's still quoted in the lesbian community, even though she was incredibly lesbian hating. And I went through one of her books because I was I knew she wasn't very good, but I knew she had a huge following. So I kind of did a whole article about how bad the stuff she said was racist, classist, lesbian hating. So I've got something to link to, and somebody again quotes her as if she's our leader. She spoke in plain language, meaning she wasn't an academic, so she reached more that way. But there's nothing she said that's good that she hadn't plagiarized. So that's another issue. So you can figure out, you can look at it and think, oh, that's familiar, but it's not from her. So so that's another direction, because she really played on women wanting to be spiritual. She's one of those that really played on it. And it's been very lucrative for certain ones. Some got into different gurus. Sometimes male, sometimes female gurus. But I think it's a very dangerous direction to go in. But it doesn't mean there can't be a real, I don't know what word, spiritual seems so contaminated. Because I think to me it's an amazing thing to be able to be open to nature and animals. Like in that book, The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger, that plants think and feel. And to get to where you're not afraid of any animals. You might be aware that certain animals could be a danger, but none are worse than male humans. None. But that if you're not afraid, then you can have an open heart and really connect. And to me, that is what can be a true spirituality. A friend just wrote to me yesterday. She hadn't really been into flies, and she's not allowed to have any pets, and she had one who finally died and misses her. I think she's very lonely. She's a very sweet woman. And this fly came in her apartment and wouldn't leave and probably was going to die. And she looked after her for hours and gave her food and water. And she really connected with this little fly and loved her. And that was so touching because, it's like these little animals that people hate, they'll just swat and kill without thinking, including those who think they're spiritual. Some of those animals can be very aware and communicate with us. And I've certainly had that experience with animals. Other people don't even think and communicate, but they can. It's very interesting.
I'm just curious about if you had any experience with the more the so-called eco-feminists. Or...
Oh, actually, I should say that when I was with Aida, we did Dykes and Gorgons, the newspaper, she was getting more into kind of spiritual stuff, and sort of, we're checking out the tarot, and there are different things that we played around with. Of course, she went back to men, so she wasn't out that long. Oh, there's another thing I don't know if I mentioned, because let's go back to this, don't forget it, but what you were mentioning. But there was this phenomenon. You know how the men are they say they're autogynephilic, and they really want to look like drag queens, and they're emulating femininity, but it's not. When lesbians didn't look so male-identified feminine in the early 70s, a lot of the men who wanted access to lesbians wanted their girlfriends to look like dykes. And Aida was one of them, who I became lovers with. And her boyfriend really pushed her into the lesbian community. And he was in a men's group with Robin Morgan's husband. And so there was that group. He was out here, but their group was in New York City.
Wait. So, sorry, back up. So,
and there were others.
So the autogynephilic men would have heterosexual girlfriends who they would push to look like lesbians, like dykes.
Yes.
And push them in. Why? Was it because the autogynephilic men wanted to be lesbians?
Well, I wouldn't call them autogynephilic because I'm not sure even what that means, but that's usually used for the ones that want to look like drag queens.
Right. So,
yeah.
But was it because they wanted to be lesbians?
Yes.
So if their girlfriend was a
yes.
okay.
I mean, one of them was really tall. He was way over 6 feet. He couldn't have pulled that off no matter how hard he tried.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some friends that theoretically were separatists, but they were buying dope from one of the dealers. Was one of these men who were saying he was a trans dyke.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a friend was at the house visiting when he showed up and said she would have had trouble figuring out that was a man. I don't think I would have, because they can really tell. I mean, women who are taking male hormones and grow beards, and if they're not really short, you can usually tell they're women. But I mean, I'm sorry, you can't always tell they're women, especially if they're really heavily bearded and they're pretty tall.
Right.
They can pass a lot more, so-called FTMs, pass a lot more easily than the men who are trying to pass as lesbians. Usually,
I agree.
They're extremely recognizable, unless they're from an ethnic background that they're very small and slight and thin-boned, etc. Like some of the ones I've seen on TV, harder to recognize. So that's not going to be very good. So that was a diversion. But yeah, there was that phenomenon. I don't know what happened to them.
When was that?
Very early 70s. Because I was with Aida 1973, 72, 73 to 74. And we went to the LA West Coast Conference together. And
yeah. You know, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know the famous sexologist Ray Blanchard, who was the one who's famous for coining the term autogynephilia. I think it was him who, if it wasn't him, it was an interview with J. Michael Bailey, but who was saying that he thought that when the autogynephilic men identify as women, they're not interested in being lesbians specifically. That they're just interested in being women, and since they're sexually attracted to women, they just so happen to identify into being lesbian. But it sounds like what you're saying is that they actually really do want to identify into being lesbian specifically. Yeah. And that was also something Janice Raymond brought up in Transsexual Empire, actually.
I never read it.
Okay.
And I don't know those two men, but what did she say?
Well, she was saying that she thought there were a lot of men who wanted to identify into lesbian feminism. Yeah. Specifically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I saw Susan Stryker's book yesterday at a bookstore, and he's the one that did the interview with Elliot that was in Sinister Wisdom, where I was completely lied about and slandered in a really disgusting personal way. And I just glanced through it, and he identifies as a lesbian feminist.
Okay.
But there used to be het men who would come into lesbian bars and look at us and leer, I want to be a lesbian. I think they all want access to lesbians. Yeah. I don't know why else they'd be doing it.
Yeah.
They don't want to be with each other. I wish I could have gotten you that cartoon where you could see it. That, I don't know how to enlarge it. But it's this lesbian that's this very grotesque how it's drawn. Man, tranny, wants her to introduce him to a lesbian for a date. And she gets all excited because she feels sympathy for him and wants to help him. So she sets up this date. And the one she has to meet him looks very similar, same tall, the same bone structure, clearly a man. And the cartoon shows that they're both intact men. And they both just flip out, go into a rage at her because, how dare she thinks they want to be with a man when they're men. And so then at the end she's drinking and blaming TERFs for the fact that they're mad at her. But Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
and we can find a lot of ways to show and prove that. But
Okay. Was there interaction between like the lesbian feminists and environmentalism?
I think a lot of lesbians were in various levels environmentalists and still
Okay.
are. Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense. The men are destroying the earth, so.
Okay, so that was the reason. I'm also curious too. You sort of alluded to this with the Michigan Women's Festival.
Oh,
Was that they were vegan?
yeah.
What? How
I
did
mean, there might
that
have been
come
some
in?
dairy, but I don't remember much. I know friends brought meat that they cooked and let some of us eat because we were pretty desperate.
Uh
Um,
huh.
and I didn't know the extent to how harmful the deprivation was, but like Julie Penelope brought meat.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think who else, but yeah, um, it was very hard on some of the lesbians health wise.
But do you remember why that became a thing?
I think there's just the assumption that, of course, we would be vegan with no concern for health. Just there's a lot of myths too, which is like the idea that if you want to survive cancer, you should be vegan.
Mm.
Which when Linda got the first very rare invasive cancer, that was amazing. She survived, and she said no to everything they suggested except surgery.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure on her was to be vegan, so she wasn't eating meat. And she was getting weaker and weaker, and she
Mm-hmm.
thought she still had cancer, was going to die. She finally went to a Chinese healer who was an MD,
Mm-hmm.
but was a traditional Chinese medicine doctor who said, you need meat. You really need meat to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much part of Chinese culture, which is a really good part.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what's happened is the whole vegan attitude has produced, over a period of decades, weaker women, thinner women, weaker women. I mean, you can often tell if somebody's been a long time vegetarian or vegan.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend who, for her health, she was trying to be vegan, and she thinks if she hadn't let herself eat an egg a day, that she would have really destroyed her health. But people who met her thought she looks like a vegan, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that means. So it's like, wow. So I do, by the way, appreciate Lear's book, although Linda and who was it? There were three of us wrote. Sylph was a vegetarian at the time. We wrote an article about being omnivores
Mm-hmm.
and why it was important to not be vegan. And I think Lear lifted out of our article. She never acknowledged it, but she read it before she wrote her book.
Mm-hmm.
She admitted that to me. So I'm like, well, thanks for erasing us. It's a shame in a way we didn't turn it into a book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not online because it was, hand typed out. It would mean retyping the whole thing. But I think we did a really good article that we were trying to dispel the myths, because we don't want any women, or especially lesbians, to damage their health or die because they're trying to help the environment and help their health, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not better for the environment either.
Mm-hmm.
That's a major myth, and but a lot don't,
Mm-hmm.
because you're nodding, so you do know.
No, I know about like how people I like seen pictures of like how you can take this wild prairie that otherwise wouldn't grow crops, and
Uh-huh.
free range cattle can actually bring
Yeah.
life back to it. So that's
Right.
one counter to the narrative that veganism
Mm-hmm.
is good for the environment. It's a particular sort of cattle raising. not
Bison
like,
even better.
yeah,
Buffalo.
yeah. So I mean bison used to cover that part
Oh,
of the world.
yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, the simplest thing, if they really want to help the environment, that as soon as you mention it, they just run away or they attack you. Stop reproducing. Just fucking stop reproducing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the most important thing. But yeah, agriculture's done horrific damage and still is,
Mm-hmm.
and just destroys whole ecosystems. So, yeah.
So then, okay, we actually haven't talked a lot about bars.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how active you were in lesbian
Oh,
bars.
yeah. I mean, it's a big loss to not have any.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I thought we had bars before we had a lesbian feminist community. I thought we'd at least have bars if things ended, but we don't. We don't have that. And some say it's because so many lesbians stopped drinking, but I don't think that's the real reason at all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do see how, like, putting a social life too much on bars can be harmful,
Yeah.
particularly for the kind of person that's predisposed to alcoholism or
Yeah.
so it's good that there should be an alternative to. I could see why an
Oh
argument could be
yeah.
made that you shouldn't overemphasize bars,
Right. There used to be
but
lesbian cafes.
yeah, I mean, well, so many lesbians like of my generation lament the loss of bars. Like I turned
Yeah.
21 in 2010, and by then it was already the case that lesbian bars were like kind of
That's
kaput,
awful.
Yeah, so
And
yeah,
yeah,
so
there were such nice bars.
what were your, did you have favorites
Yeah,
or
I
uh-huh.
did. I liked Maud's in San Francisco. It's one of the first I went to. I think the very first I went to was Wild Side West. Maud's was owned by Ricky Stryker, who later um, did Amelia's. That was in the Mission
Uh-huh.
with this big photo of Amelia Earhart looking like a dyke. That was interesting. That was really popular.
Oh.
But then it got to be the bars for me were expensive, but recently, Maud's has this annual kind of retrospective. Oh, and it used to be like during the Dyke March, the bar that's where Maud's was would put up a sign saying Maud's to sort of honor that Maud's was there. It was decades ago. But fucking Elliot posted on the page because he knew that's the bar he used to go to. So he gets in there, like with my friend I won't mention, that he will post on her page and like bait me, hoping I will say something and lose that friendship. So I posted about him right there in the Maud's thing because if I lose them, I don't care. And I got a real reprimand. Everybody's welcome.
Mm.
So, but there was Maud's, Amelia's, the Jubilee in Oakland. That was, at that point, seemed pretty far away, but in retrospect, it wasn't that far. And that was, I don't know if it was owned by black lesbians or was primarily a black lesbian bar, and it was really nice. I mean, it had such a nice feeling. I don't think they allowed men in at all. And when you went to be let in, they would look through this little window at you and decide if you could come in, and it would be packed, and it was good music and good dancing. I'm trying to think what else.
So I'm just curious. Yeah, I was just curious about how that they did gatekeeping for that.
And
if
that they did, yeah,
Yeah,
they checked
okay.
everybody out. There was the Bacchanal that was in Albany, so that was much more upscale bar, and they would have like mini concerts. So lesbians would come and perform music on the little stage, and it was hard to do dancing, but that was Joanna Griffin owned that. I'm trying to think what else. There were a lot, and there were different cities. There was a bar out in the Concord, I guess Walnut Creek area, where I'm trying to think, what's her name? The famous lesbian most people don't know is a lesbian would go dancing with her lover Robin, Robin Crawford, Whitney Houston. So people see Whitney Houston with Robin.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. All right.
And I have friends who probably remember the name of that bar, but I never went to that bar because that was a long way, it seemed.
Okay.
So
I'm
who
just
knew? I mean, all this stuff's going on.
Was there any like big like cultural or class divisions that you noticed in the bars?
Yeah. Well, the bars tend to be more sort of working class,
Okay.
and certainly, yeah. The Bacchanal was more, sort of, like I said, upscale.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't even know if they had hard liquor there, so it was sort of like probably beer and wine. I don't know, but I don't remember like it being like some other parts of the lesbian community that were really divided. Like now, I think there's a whole underground that's very privileged lesbians that will have performances at their houses, invitation only. And I went to one a few years ago to see that amazing lesbian performer, and I'm going blank. I can just picture her. Oh, it'll come back to me. And she lives Cambria, and she's a really good lesbian singer-songwriter. And so she was performing at this house concert, and somehow I was invited, and when I got in there, I was being looked at like, how did that get in here? And I could see somebody was asking somebody about how did I get there. So I haven't been invited to anything like, and that was in the hills overlooking the bay. I haven't been invited to anything like that again. And there was an event at Freight and Salvage that was a huge lesbian music event, and it was expensive, so a friend paid for me to come with her, and she's African descent, and we didn't see anybody else in the audience other than the Washington sisters, who were performers, who were African descent, and it was almost very rich-looking white women who were lesbians. I've never seen them, and they're clearly in what I was going to say is our community, but I guess it's not our community. So there's a whole sub-community. I have no idea how many of them there are.
Okay, back. You said the bar scene tended to skew more working class, but did you get the impression that more upper class lesbians were organizing their own?
In retrospect,
things?
Probably, but I wasn't aware at the time, or maybe they weren't because there weren't that many in a way, and it was kind of at a certain point it was kind of fun and in and trendy to go to some of the bars, but not this. To them would have been the scarier bars, which have been the really more class oppressed bars. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be nice to know more in terms of others who went more regular. Because I would go if there was like a group of us going, or there was a particular event we were going to go to. But at a certain point when there became things that were not in the bars, I went to the things that were not in the bars, so you could have dances. And Ollie's was interesting because it had been an Italian restaurant I'd gone to with my parents. And it's the last place I saw my father, actually, where I and my collective got in a big fight with him and his wife, and we walked out. But it then was bought by Ollie, who turned it into a bar, but it had this back room that was huge. So that's where there could be plays, there could be readings, there could be bands and dancing. It was wonderful. So you had the bar in the front, places you could sit and talk, back with performances and music. And that was just wonderful. That went for years. I'm trying to think, and I think there's some other spaces like that, but this was owned by a lesbian. Some of the other spaces, something would be rented for a while, but every loss was a huge loss. Like I was saying, there were more recently, meaning the last 10, 12 years, there were yard concerts that lesbians had in their yards. Would be like 3 bands would perform throughout the day, and when they moved or sold the property, that was it, gone. The Montclair Women's Club, gone. If somebody had bought that thing, that space, that could have continued as a lesbian club, but somebody would have had to have money. But see, the gay men can just do that. They've got the money. They've got the means. But I'm trying to think, because once you lose the space, then you don't get more. It doesn't come back. And there are other places that lesbians used to go to, like Cafe Trieste in Berkeley. Again, this would have been about the last 10, 15 years. That very small, but we could get up and dance there. It was a public space, but we'd fill it with lesbians. High Street Station in Alameda was like that. Now there's the Ivy Room, which is disgusting. But that's like it, right? I mean, it's really sad. But even just having like a large property or a house that you could have a room that you could have dancing, in the old days, the rented houses, could rent a whole house for $100 with many bedrooms and have a big living room, dining room that could be turned into a dance floor. Oh, and then there were the bookstores, and Mama Bear's was a bookstore that also had performances that would be like readings and plays, and so all of that was being gone is a huge loss. There were 3 bookstores at least in the Bay Area. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, and the martial arts schools are all gone. I mean, there was so much. And some of it ended pretty early, but other things went away a long time. But anyway, before 1990, there was a lot. So when they say they don't know about it, it's because they don't know about it. But they have to be careful to not say it didn't exist. And that we had women-only space. And the trainees were not nicer then at all. They're always dangerous. They're always dangerous. If they're not killing you, they're threatening you. I don't know how many lesbians are afraid to go anywhere because they've been threatened. I mean, there's that, too. I forget. I mean, I'm not going to stay home because I've been threatened. But it does happen.
So then, like, once we did go into the 90s, it really, the impression I get, and I was born in 1989, so I'm not going by memory, I'm going by lore.
Yes, yes.
Is that
Yes.
there were a lot of lesbian celebrities that came out in
Oh,
really the
right.
second half of the 90s, or maybe the
Right.
mid 90s. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know exactly when
Yes.
Katie Lang came out, but it was sometime around
Right.
then, and there were
Right.
Melissa Etheridge and the Indigo Girls, and some eventually Ellen
Ellen.
DeGeneres. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you
Yep.
think that changed? Do you remember? First of all, do you remember when that happened?
Vaguely. I mean, I
Okay.
remember it happened, but I was going to say that recently, because some are so upset with the whole trans thing, they're saying it was better before. I don't think they were alive before. It was better. Like, now we're going underground, and it's going to be better again than when, like, what? Than when we had all these rights. I think it's been really good for us that there are public beloved lesbians, acknowledged, that exist. I mean, people are affected by all that. So if you had an emergency and went to the hospital in the past, they figure out you're lesbian, they might want to kill you or do something that will harm you forever, and they certainly don't care for you. Now it might be different because more and more have come out. Some of their own family are lesbians or are out, or people that are famous. I mean, it has an effect. The famous people that are beloved, it really has an effect. And I mean, I hate the LGBTQIA, and I always say just add KKK and get it over with. That whole thing is our enemies, except for the L part. But, and gay men, well, they can be allies in some ways, and I'm appreciative of some of the ones that are actually fighting the trans cult. But the rest of it, take the Q and the T and shove it. I mean, it's just like, they're our enemies. And I mean, to me, it's horrifying that we're identified with drag queens and we're identified with these men who are doing horrific things, because whoever put that together is repeated everywhere. And I've had a het woman new friend online saying, like, you all should take more control of your community. And what are you talking about? LGBTQ whatever. I said, why is that my community? It belongs more to her. If we're talking about T, because they're het men and she's het. I mean, she didn't know what to say. It was like, I'm a lesbian. These are not my people. These are my enemy. So
yeah, I'm just curious too. Like, you mentioned before, you like the fact that they're public lesbians.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and that do you think that more public, famous celebrity lesbian scene displaced? Like, was there in terms of thinking back towards the more grassroots folky, or it wasn't necessarily folk, but the more underground or not mainstream music scene that blossomed in the 70s. Do you think any of that famous lesbian stuff displaced that, or did it?
I don't think so, really. I mean, I think there were people. See, I'm still very suspicious of the Olivia group, some of whom came from the Furies, who did that whole thing of making Virginia Ruffalo a prisoner. I think I talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they got into some amazing positions of power that still, I'm still wondering what happened, who they all were, and nobody else ever talks about it except a few of us who've been watching it and wondering. So they did some stuff to bland things out. But in other ways, they also got some of the music made in public and available. I just think as much of that as possible can be good. I mean, not the increase of the sadomasochism and us being associated with it. But it's sort of like even when Ellen first was on TV and she had a little kind of head hairstyle, and then when she really came out, she looked like a lesbian. Like, she made that change because suddenly it was okay. And I think that helps and affects all of us. So any way that can be done, and getting rights, marriage rights. I mean, lesbians can say they don't care and it doesn't matter. Well, of course it matters. I mean, if you have a lover who's in the hospital and decisions need to be made, and her family who hates her, who she hasn't been around for decades, can just come in and have her locked up somewhere, that's pretty bad. And that still happens. but it's less so when there's marriage rights.
I'm just curious, when did you first hear about gay marriage or same-sex marriage as a proposal?
I'm not even sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you remember amongst the lesbians you were with, was there controversy about it? Were there some that said, "Oh, that was not a good idea"?
There wouldn't have been anybody I was really friends with.
Okay.
But maybe in other like online, you can be interacting with somebody you don't know at all. And some are saying that, but I don't know. I mean, I often think of things as a class division. That's from somebody who's more privileged, because they're going to feel protected. They're not going to ever be in danger. They think they won't, and then they can't imagine somebody else might be. It's like anybody helping Trump win. I can't believe it. Some of the lesbians I know who are gonna, in various ways help him. I mean, I don't know if you know what he said yesterday. It was
I haven't kept track.
About Kamala. He said,
"Oh no."
Yeah, he said she's a bum and she has low IQ.
Okay.
Those are racist tropes.
Uh-huh.
I'd like to see their IQs compared.
Yeah.
In a bum? Anyway, I know she's not what everybody wants, but better than him. I mean, if the Nazis get in power again, that's pretty scary what could happen. He wants to make sure there won't be any more elections, among other things. But
Well, okay, so one other cultural phenomenon we alluded to earlier about how there wasn't really, lesbian themed cinema wasn't really a thing early on because it was
there was bad before. Yeah, there was the lesbian feminist movement. That's, it's like the books, whatever there was in the films were just evil.
Okay.
And now there's this porny crap.
Well, do you remember, was there a particular movie that you remember that was lesbian themed that you're like, oh wow, I actually liked that, like the first time? Or
I have to think about that. I should know. I should have one on the top of my brain, but I don't.
Because even as recently, I'm much younger than you, and even as recently as like the 1910s, lesbians would frequently lament how bad a lot of lesbian films were. But I think, there were there are a few good ones. So
there weren't some good books, but what were they? What are they? I do think there's the whole thing with the sadomasochism and pornifying of lesbians and women has been horrific. That's changed things. But there's that. Well, there are these lesbian parts to a number of films and TV series.
Yeah.
Like Deadlock.
Okay.
From Tasmania. It was really good. And I hope they do a sequel. It's so funny because it seems like there's this really foul-mouthed detective who's het, and the main character is a lesbian. It looks like it's made by lesbians. And I think at the end, the detective who's just uses the most disgusting language for women and all, I think at the end she's changed and I think she's come out. But it's funny at the same time as being a murder mystery. And that is one of the best things I've seen. I know there are others, but that was fairly recent, and that was really good. I'm seeing a lot of lesbian characters that are sort of part of different films and TV series that are actually really nice.
Yeah.
Like there's this recent one that's Orphan Black, the series Echoes. Suddenly it's a lesbian story. Huh? Okay. See what the next episode is going to be, but I knew there were lesbians in it, you could tell, but it's the main characters, it seems. But in terms of the early stuff, what else was there? I know there was good stuff. I didn't like what a lot of ones liked, like Salmon Berries.
I don't think very many people liked that.
Really?
At least I only heard that as a butt of jokes, but I don't know.
Good.
But it was maybe on After Ellen, back on the forum there, they were talking about lesbian films, and it came up that Salmon Berries might have been the worst of the worst.
There were worse ones before, but
Claire of the Moon was another one people joked about.
I don't think I saw that. Or if I did, I forgot. But yeah. Well, the ones before, like Killing of Sister George, it's about as bad as it gets.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
That was before we had anything. And that's the only film I and my first lover saw together, which I think was incredibly traumatizing. That was English. And Yeah.
I'm just curious
Oh, that was horrible.
if you hadn't have you read the Stone Cold Butch Blues, the book?
No.
Okay.
Stone Butch Blues.
Yeah, Stone. Yeah, sorry,
Yes.
Stone
Yes.
Butch Blues. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm curious if you had an opinion on that.
Oh, a lot. Yeah. Um, I wonder, in retrospect, if she was Butch because of things she said and did.
Mhm.
Um, I think this is Leslie Feinberg, right?
Mhm.
Popularizing Stone Butch, like lesbians will say, I'm a Stone Butch. Do you know what it means? To me, that nobody is a Stone Butch unless they've been horribly traumatized and they don't want to be touched. That's what it's about. It's not something to make popular or brag about that I see. But
Mhm.
a lot of lesbians say they're Butch are not. They're posturing, like in Lauren Cameron's book, Body Alchemy. And they're all like supposedly butches who transition to men. They're all femme. It's a little
Mm.
hard to tell after they're posing and there's only particular photos. And she's dead now. She killed herself. But I'm trying to think what else Stone Butch was. Oh, there's so much I could say about it. At the time, I was happy to see it because I thought nobody else is talking about what it means to be ostracized and alone
Mhm.
as a butch among lesbians. But in retrospect, I think it's really bad.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
she was trying to be a tranny, Leslie Feinberg. She was taking hormones. I
Mhm.
saw her read once, and yeah. So that was, I would not recommend that
Mm.
at all. But what else is there?
Yeah. Are there other fiction books that
Hmm.
you liked or?
There must be. But what? I know there are others. There was a book I read years ago that was like a very, very nice love story. I don't know why it had such a silly name. The name was Folly. I don't remember the writer.
Mhm.
But this was decades ago. And that was a nice lesbian love story. And I know there are a bunch of others. I've got some, but I have to think about it. A lot
Okay.
can't be gotten. Um, yeah, and in terms of films and TV shows, Night Detective was interesting with Jodie Foster,
Mhm.
although she's disgustingly head in it. But it does look like her friend and fellow cop, they're together at the end.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's interesting. There's some very more interesting things out, but in terms of the past, okay, what else is there to ask or say about?
I
There's
don't.
so much. I don't want to forget anything.
Yeah. I don't know.
I wish I could just bring you back on a certain day where there's all this stuff going on.
Mhm.
Like just a day of concerts and parties and dancing and
Mhm.
readings, and I mean there were some really good plays
Mhm.
that lesbians did, like in a very with a very small audience.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the lesbians is still doing some of those plays, but I haven't liked some of her other her politics flipped. But Terry Baum did a play
Mm.
that was called first it was called Death Angel, and she was told don't use that name because that's what Mengele was called. So she switched it to Immediate Family, and it's just her doing the play with what's the other character is supposed to be a comatose lover who's dying, and
Mhm.
is she gonna go to prison because she's gonna turn off the life support?
Mm.
And
Okay.
it's
Uh huh.
really, really powerful and good. Yeah,
Mhm.
so, yeah, that was really interesting. That may be on video somewhere.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what else? There were a lot of little plays and things that
Mhm.
lesbians did, including in the disability community, disabled lesbians
Mhm.
did plays and comedy, um, and then there were lesbians. There was Fat Lip Readers Theater, which was fat lesbians, or mostly lesbians, a few het women, did plays about against fat oppression. There were so many things that was like all this creativity that it didn't have to be things made with a lot of money, but most of it was not recorded in any way. But it would
Mhm.
be performed in small spaces, so it could be done. There was tons of stuff. And lots of little different conferences. Like there was a disabled women's conference years ago that was mostly done by lesbians, I think. And it was so nice. It was so good. But women only. Absolutely, adamantly, women only. And we didn't have to think about, oh, there's a man here. Olak had been lesbian only. It's supposed to be lesbian only. But then suddenly there was a man. I think he's gone now, though. That's good, the local one. But I remember at one point there was a conference, or there's some kind of event, and somebody said, well, shouldn't we do some younger lesbians? Shouldn't we do something to help make trans women feel more welcome? And there were 3 different lesbians from Olak who stood up and said, they're men. They already have way more than we will ever have. No. Like, why would we welcome them in what had been one of our only spaces? I was very impressed. That was before I was old enough to join Olak. But I was very impressed. And when I got into a local Olak, I don't know who that was, because they're much more like welcoming of the men now. I hope they're changing. But anyway.
Well, that's...
Is this already enough?
No, I think, I mean, unless there's something else you really want to cover, we've got like maybe a solid hour and a half of footage.
Too much? Yeah.
No,
and there'll be
it's
some
great.
repeats.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything else to ask? That
I mean, what arts have we not talked about? Visual arts, painting.
Oh.
What about, do you remember anything about painting or photography?
There was some of
sculpture.
That too. Yeah, there was all some of that too. It's true. Yeah. That would be lesbian, like, shows of art. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there was so much stuff. But then when and where was it? It would be like for a period of time. Then it would be over. So there'd be a space that was set up for it. And it would overlap with feminist women at women. But, yeah. What else? And the music, so many kinds of music. It's true there was a lot of folk music, but not just folk music. Yeah, I don't know what you'd even categorize B.B. Croce, their music.
I don't know. I haven't heard it.
They were really amazing, and they were local. And to me, their best singers and songwriter, Virginia Rubino, died a couple of years ago. She fell in her bathroom and died, so it's another reason to not fall. But I haven't been able to find the main song that I thought was so incredible online. You can find some of their other songs. They have an album that was put out by Olivia. Yeah. And then there were the more recent local lesbian performers that you would go and see at places like El Rio and coffee houses. Yeah.
I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, the third wave feminism brought a lot of the Riot Girl music stuff, and that was popular amongst some lesbians of, like Slater Kinney. But I don't know how connected that was to any sort of older
I don't know.
feminist anything.
I'm always worried about the age thing and talking in terms of waves, because I think there's so much overlap. But I don't really know about them, but I've certainly heard. I mean, it sounds like they're very popular. But it'd just be nice to have music that's lesbian music be available, that could get access to it. Because like when there are lesbian bookstores, you go in and you could buy albums. And there were a lot of lesbian albums. Some of them will still be available. Like Alex Dobkin, like the politics were great. I wasn't crazy about the music necessarily, but the politics were incredible. And she was performing until she died just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So, and she had been local and then went back east. I mean, she had started out in New York, but yeah. But I know there's more. There was so much, and there is obviously more now too than what we know. I mean, most of the lesbians I know don't know and didn't know about the performers I was seeing locally perform. Like there was the Fabulosa Festival that was open to the public, but mostly lesbian. And I went every time until, and I was going to say the place they lost was Walker Creek Ranch, because I couldn't remember it. And
was that the thing with the lawsuit?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I think we covered that last time.
That was terrible.
Yeah.
So, because that was, that was close enough you could drive to, and be at and eat good food and hear all this lesbian music and party and dance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's gone. I mean, they have a place they bought land, but it's like 3-4 hours from here.
Mm-hmm.
So, then I heard it really changed. They really invited more men. So there'd be a hot tub full of men.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, not doing that. So.
Mm. Well, any closing thoughts for today, or?
Just it's not better to go underground. Things were not better before.
Uh-huh.
It drives me nuts hearing all the weird myths and things being said and resaid that are not true. No, the first trannies, I don't know. I mean, I know you're not supposed to call them trannies. Men masquerading as lesbians. They were not nicer in the past than now at all.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't be worse. They were all horrible. None of them are okay. None of them want to quietly live their lives and not be in our way, because the whole point of what they're doing is to take over what we have and destroy us. And I always compare it to Silence of the Lambs. They want to kill us and wear our skin.
Mm-hmm.
Except they also still want sexual access to us. So having us imprisoned to rape is really what they would most like. I don't know any that are okay. I keep being told, I know a really nice one. I'm friends with a really nice one. Who, where, what?
Mm-hmm.
Let's check him out and see what he has to say. I've been aware of them at this point since I was a teenager. I don't know of any that are not really horrible and dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I wish the stalker that I have would go away.
Mm-hmm.
And why are they still alive when so many wonderful lesbians have died is another question. If it's supposed to be so bad for them to have the hormones. Because I don't know of any that died.
Well, on that note,
Maybe that should be cut.
yeah, I'll be redacting this.
Okay.
There's a lot.
Actually, Leslie Feinberg's dead, but that's another issue. But she's a woman, not a man.
Uh-huh.
But out of that cult,
Uh-huh.
it's only the lesbians who died. They're the women.
Mm-hmm.
How can those men still be alive? All of them. The one with Olivia. He got really defended, and Olivia brought him as a sound engineer.
Right, I remember that.
And online recently, I don't know, a year or two ago, maybe a little longer, he started attacking me in a friend's thread. I don't know him. I've never met him. He knew who I was. They hate us. They really do. If you've said no to them, I always say, maybe this part could be banned. If you're not sure and you think you know a nice man who says he's a woman or a lesbian, say no to him. Say no in a number of different ways, but see if the first no doesn't get incredible hatred from him to you, because that's the way to really tell.
Okay.
Yeah, stop feeding them and supporting them.
Be honest. Say the truth. Say the truth. Don't feel like you have to be nice.
Right. But a lot of the women really worship them. So they don't even know when they're supporting them. I can see it, especially when they go after us and say we're being mean, to say we don't want a man in what is a very rare lesbian space. So that's a problem too.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk about that wonderful sort of trapeze through lesbian and lesbian separatist, lesbian feminist history. So
thank you.
Yeah.
And you're fun in nature. We're going to go see more wild animals.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Yeah, thank you. And get in touch if anybody wants more details.
And yeah, I'll leave. I could leave some contact info in the comments.
And our
section.
book is available online. Almost all of it's there, updated. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah. Oh well.
All right.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Bye.